Hi, everybody. My name is Erway. I'm a senior product manager for our progressive web apps efforts here at Magento, and I couldn't be more happy to be here on the panel around progressive web apps. And so, I've been in the internet. I've been working in the web since the early 1990s, way back in the dinosaur days of Netscape and such, and I couldn't be more excited. And today's theme is going to be about getting real and really getting down to the details and the facts around progressive web apps. And so we're going to talk to quite a few people who've actually done real work within progressive web apps and really start to understand the details and the promise of what we've heard from Peter and others already around performance, business, and other aspects of progressive web apps that are really going to make a superior shopping experience for you in the end. So with that in mind, let's go through and have some introductions for our panelists, and we'll get into the themes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marcin, Dyguda. I'm from Poland. I work at Divante. We are the e-commerce software house, and we've created something called View Storefront, which is a standalone PWA single-page application, which is platform agnostic, and basically that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pierre. So I'm the CTO of a French agency named Oxitec. And back in 2015, when we saw the announcement of Magento 2, we decided that maybe there were other solutions at the time, React, that may solve the issues that we saw with Magento 2. And we started prototyping things, and a single-page app, and then native apps, which became, in the end, a product named FrontCommerce, which is a progressive web app React application with a GraphQL middleware, and a Magento module that adds things that's missing to the Magento REST API. So we have shops in productions in the beginning of the year, and we learn a lot of things, so I'm happy to share it with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamie. I'm the director of Deity. Within Deity, we created also a platform-agnostic PWA solution, which has a service-oriented architecture in the backend. What we did is a couple of years ago, the same as Pierre did, we saw the problems on the front ends happening, and then we decided to build a headless solution. Back then, we didn't really know PWA yet; it didn't exist. So we built a headless solution based on React.js Redux. There was Node.js GraphQL in the backend, and then behind it there is solutions like Magento 2. We've been having live shops for a few years now. We're building more and more. To our partners, we have been releasing open source, and soon, more about that later, we will be releasing to everyone.
Was that a tease? Was that a hint?
Ooh, that was
at
a
a
very
later
big
disclosure?
teasing.
That's pretty cool. My name is James Zetlen. I am front-end architect for Magento, and over the last year and a half, I've been quite focused on working with our team of superstar architects and developers on the set of standards and developer tools and UX primitives that I like to call PWA Studio. In contrast, I think, to other implementations of progressive web apps, start to finish, that these fine folks have implemented. Our tooling is meant to work with all of them, and also to bring to the PWA world the things that are signature to Magento. That is a complete commitment to extensibility, which easily can lead to a very complicated and hard to follow and perhaps even underperforming piece of software. So our effort is to make it not that. And the modern tooling available in the JavaScript world, it enables it. And we've got some awesome stuff in the pipeline. We've already released a lot of the initial work that we've done in open source, and we're already getting engagement in that stuff from our community, for which we are eternally grateful.
Great. Excellent. So in keeping up with the theme, so the 1990s and the keeping up with the real theme, I know we've been building on a lot of success and a lot of messaging around the benefits of PWA at conferences like Imagine and others. And so for the theme today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And so, in the spirit of real world, this is a true story of four panelists picked for a panel to have their session taped and find out what happens, of course, when people stop being polite and people start getting real. This is the real world PWA. So
I was more of a road rules guy myself.
More road rules? Okay, well, very good. So let's take a look at the agenda real quick. We've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So we can do advance real quick. So we've got two major themes for this morning. So one of them is how do we move to progressive web apps? We're going to talk about some real-world examples from again, folks who've actually done this in the real world. And then we're going to save some time talking about the developer experience. The developer experience is going to change as a result of this, and we really want to get a couple insights in there should we have time. And then, of course, we'll leave a few minutes, roughly around 12:05 or so, for questions. So we'll do our very best. This is something we could likely take hours and hours upon, so we'll do our best to keep time and make sure that make sure we cover this in as much breadth as possible. But again, make sure we have some time for questions at the end. So let's move to the next slide here and talk about theme number one. Theme number one is how do we move to progressive web apps? I know we've got a couple different solutions here, and I know we talked a little bit as a panel in advance. And so who'd like to get started in terms of what it means from a business, what it means from a developer standpoint?
Yeah, I can start. Okay, so moving to progressive web apps, like from our experience, is you can have basics of PWA without rewriting anything. Like Shane was doing a presentation before us, and he was showing that you can have some things of progressive web apps in your actual store. But from our experience, is like deepening a technological depth, I would say. It's like building over some new things over the old code, and going fully headless is the future, I would say, because communication over API is the thing that gives you the best performance. And we see that after building our product, the communication over API with Magento 2 works perfectly well, and the performance is great. So I think that this is the way how we should get into the progressive web apps, like
Great.
fully.
Jamie, how about
Yes.
yourself?
So as we build our product platform agnostic, it's actually, you don't really have to throw away your whole web shop, everything you have. You can use what you already have and just connect it to the different front end. And you don't even have to do that fully headless. So one of the examples we did, we actually did fully headless, and we just used what they had and started to build something new in front. But what we also did is with a shop who had a very big problem. They were losing 1/3 of their traffic, and they had like more than 2 million each month, and they were losing 1/3. And what we did is we identified the pages which had the highest load and which give the biggest trouble, and these ones we brought to the headless solution. So basically we built an extra web shop next to it. Then we built a Nginx server which was saying, hey, go left or go right. And with that we were able to catch all this traffic back for this customer, and we were able to do that in just 1.5 months. You can build this kind of solutions. And then later you can bring the rest headless, and you can really make sure that the whole thing is working. But you can solve a problem like that and bring a very good experience to the web in no time.
Great. Pierre, how about your experiences?
Yeah, most of our experience is about migrating from Magento 1 to Magento 2 because we saw that as a needed way to rewrite most of the front-end part to match Magento 2. And that's when we introduced front commerce in the shops. So basically, that's not the same thing that Vue Storefront or that Maya said about their experience, because our choice was to start with less features. So we could just reuse what we call the design tokens. That means the colors, the logo, part of the pages from the Magento 1 shops, put it in the front commerce and the React application, and reduce the number of pages. And after that, even just for beta users or before going fully in production, when the customer thinks all the features are here, we can start adding more and more features like handling configurable products, user account, guest checkouts, things like that. So basically, that's a way to migrate from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And our experience with Magento 2 is that as soon as you add the few endpoints that are missing by default in the Magento 2 REST API, basically you have everything that's working, because extensions that are using the service API and are not relying too much on the session work out of the box without much more work for you.
Great. And James, I know we talk to customers all the time. Any perspective from a studio standpoint that you'd like to share?
I'm actually curious about the commonality between the solutions that each of you three and the teams that you represent selected. So, and that's not really a dodge. We also support headless Magento. In fact, we want to make it kind of standard. It's a concept and a term, a rather macabre term that the community came up with. I mean, I think of it as service-oriented architecture, which I think Roland agrees. But I came up with something at Reacticon which completely failed to take on as a concept, which is to say that you can get a lot of the advantage of so-called headless architectures that encapsulate the front ends and the back end logic more cleanly, but have them live in the same IT stack, thus just getting rid only of the sort of the block and render layer that is sometimes the hardest to maintain. And I like to call it necklace Magento.
Right.
And that did not catch on. Like,
Right.
that laugh is derision at how bad
Right.
that idea is. But so, yeah, so that's not the term, but I think it is relevant to ask why all of you are implementing your storefronts on a separate front end for back end. Like, I'm sorry, separate back end for front end. Like, a Magento store, a Magento instance today can be installed on a single server or put in a single cloud. And you don't have to have somebody draw a diagram of the network topology. The cloud kind of handles that. Adding another node to this system where it's literally node, where a node server is running separately, it's an expense. It's a higher total maintenance cost, but there's a reward, and I suspect that all three of you would say the reward is half that you can do server-side render of your JavaScript, and the other half that Magento is slow and this is faster. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is accurate, but also the PWA gives you, it's an answer for mobile application alternative also. So you're covering with one code base, for example, web shop, and also the standalone apps for eShops, because eShops has those apps. I just wanted to mention that, for example, we also had an experience with, because Magento to checkout is kind of tricky and it is very hard to customize. But we got customers that have the mainly big customization on the checkout in Magento 1 and in Magento 2. And we also support the native checkout. So the full web page is in progressive web app, but on checkout we just redirect it into the strict Magento checkout. So this is like a hybrid kind of, and it makes the implementation cost lower a bit. But yeah, I mean that the answer to this is mostly the alternative to real iOS and Google apps.
I'm not sure I understand. Sorry, may I ask?
Yeah, sure.
I want to give you guys the chance. So you can still write the PWA that gets installed on the home screen because of PWA capabilities. Yeah. And again, all of the assets that are not API calls are static assets, right? Mm-hmm. So apart from server-side render, what is the need to have another web server just to serve those static assets when you have to ask Magento for the data anyway? That's what I'm wondering, and why everyone chose to have a separate server that just did that and that was running on a different technology stack. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm asking. And I think the app situation doesn't really preclude that because you're still making API calls out to the web, right? Yeah. Yeah. So that's I'm trying to clarify.
Also, you're thinking about microservices approach. So integrations are with third parties are much easier, I would say, because this is also the tricky part sometimes with Magento. So the progressive web apps for us is just the beginning, I would say. So we might see the pros and cons of it in 1-2 years from now. So we'll see.
So for us, basically, the most important thing is that we're building a service-oriented architecture. And as you just mentioned, third-party integrations. I mean, not only that, but you don't have all the data from one source. And especially when you get bigger and bigger, we've seen many Magento stores running, which had a lot of customizations inside. And then at some point, things start falling apart and they don't know where it's coming from. And if you want to keep it clean, have the data from other services, use separate stock services because you have drop shippers all over the world. You need a solid system for that. And if you start building in this service-oriented architecture, you can actually use this, replace it, build it bigger when you get bigger. When you start building monolithic, it gets much, much harder to later change if your organization grows. So that's one of the things, and obviously one of the things I personally very much like is because we have the Node.js in between, we don't need any more varnish. So that is one thing most developers really are not happy with. So this is something, it solves a lot of things which you might later run into, which will give you a problem when you grow. So we rather have a solid architecture from the start than later fix all the problems.
For front commerce, so it's almost the same. It's server-side rendering, of course, and also microservices architecture. But something that's really our vision since the beginning is to allow to create user experience and really great user experiences. And for that, we wanted to use the languages that people at that time were using. And there was this component approach that emerged at the time, and there were two other technologies that allowed and that embraced this component approach. So the first one is GraphQL, and at the time, and the first version of, the first prototype of front commerce were using something named FileCore, which is from Netflix. So basically everything was client-side first, and it's almost the same technology. But when we decided to move that on the server for server-side rendering, we had to use Node, and we have all the benefits of a component UI without the drawbacks of a lot of REST API calls, and we could move some caching on the server, plus the benefits of the microservice architecture. 1 year later, in 2016, when we decided to really, after demos and after getting clients, to really build front commerce, it was clear for us that GraphQL was much more important, and a lot of, the community was much more important in GraphQL than in FileCore, so we write that using GraphQL, and basically for us that's really a way to expose the data that's maybe in Magento or other services in domain terms that could be understood by front-end developers without knowing anything about where the data is stored and the database architecture.
Okay, I see. Putting aside server-side render, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it won't be necessary very shortly. What's to stop us from having 2 instances of Magento and thereby supporting a microservice architecture? Because I think of that as definitely good. You're all on the right track with microservices and with service-oriented architectures, but PWA is something different. I think they're good, they work together, but I was 2 Magentos. One of them is just a static server, really. It's just a deploy target. So I feel like a lot of people in this room are completely familiar with the process of creating, optimizing, and deploying a Magento instance, but to add to the development staff somebody who knows how to get a Node instance going, get the process manager up, deploy that thing, watch the graph, that just seems like the reward to me would have to be clearer and stronger than, well, SSR and not having to use varnish, which I admit is a very, very good reward. So I guess that's the challenge to me is has anyone tried or feel weird about just microservices on multiple Magento instances?
Well, I also think what is for me and for our company and also for our customers very important is that you build something you can grow with. And if you want to spend 100,000 euros on, or pounds for that matter, but if you want to spend so much money on building a decent shop, then make sure you can still keep on using it. And the maintenance cost might be higher in the beginning if you use indeed these different services there. But in the end, it's going to save you so much more time and so much more money, because when you grow and you need to replace certain elements, good luck replacing something in a monolithic architecture there. That's going to be a hell of a job. And the maintenance will get higher and higher as soon as it gets more complex. So it's like a peak, little bit more expensive in the beginning, but in the end that will be way more rewarding. And I think everyone who builds a shop and spends 100,000 euros on this shop, I think is intended to build it for grow and not to stay on the same level.
Right, actually a really nice segue into our second topic. So we've already touched a little bit on developer experience. We talked a little bit about Varnish and other things, and so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about developer experience. I think we've talked internally around the fact that this does create a new role, it does create a new discipline and a way of doing things, and so who'd like to kind of share their experiences on what that's meant to them?
For us, that there was a really big change when we start thinking about components. It's a bit like blocks in Magento, but basically you start to think about them as a unit, and you know that there won't be any side effects and things like that. So you can start using tools such as UI development environments. In Front Commerce, we are using Storybook, and that's also in the PWAs studio, I think. Basically, you start just like a unit test. You just isolate your component and start thinking about the different use cases. For instance, the Add to Cart button. They could be a loading state as soon as the user click on it. They could be a disabled state when the product is out of stock. But for instance, in one of our production projects, we had a lot of requirements for that button, and it became more and more complex. Like if there are no stock on the shop, but on the physical stores, then you should display a button that shows the stores with the stock. And then you start adding complexity to that components. And as a developer, often it was something that could generate some kind of frustration because everything is always broken at some other part of the code when you are adding this modification. Performance-wise, it could lead to very slow pages. And having this just encapsulated components with their explicit data dependencies allows us to be much more productive and to prevent side effects and thus develop more quickly and iterate on new design and thus create better experiences.
Great.
So from our point of view, if you start working with this kind of solutions, it's indeed what James says, you need different people for that. Doesn't necessarily have to be someone totally different. I mean, the people need to learn other skills. But the nice thing is that they can all work separately. So where before a front end has to wait before the back end makes it ready, all this kind of stuff that is not necessary anymore. So the front end guys can just start building their application and because of the GraphQL and the other parts, tell the back end developer, hey, this is what we need. To give you a real life example of that is that we build a store which has, I think now live at the moment, 8 million products in there. It's tested with 25 million products. And what happened is that our front-end developers has been building this store, just the front-end application, and they were done in just, I think, 2.5 months, something like that, 3 months. The whole thing was up and running. And then the guys who were building the database and were building the search algorithm were not done at all. So we had to pull in someone else to make that fix for it. But it was really fast to do. This normal kind of projects will take months because we all have to wait for each other to finish and we cannot work separately. And if you do this integrated, very small with, for example, with Magento, our friends from the Shipper HQ and our partners, they build a solution for checkout. And I think most of you, if you ever worked with the checkout of Magento 2 and tried to change something there, it's quite of a hell to do that. Quite of a hell. I don't know how to say it nicely. But and that was nice enough. Good.
And Jamie, I think we talked a little bit in the green room. You guys have, experimentation is a big part of developer experience. You guys may have sounds like there's some news to share today as well. So
yeah, cool. So to get us started, actually, I think the nicest thing to do is to all get your ass over to the Netherlands on the 4th of October, because we will have Reacticon, and we will have Jitse there. And during Reacticon, we will actually fully open source, fully release our first open source version for everyone of Deity. This will be obviously together with a great party to celebrate, and of course a workshop day afterwards hosted by us, where you can all learn from our front-end developers, from our core guys, how we build it and how you can start building it. So please, 4th of October, be there in the Netherlands.
that is awesome. Yeah. Great. So just being mindful of time, I know we're running a little bit behind. I do want to reserve a few minutes at the end here for questions. I'm sure this audience must have quite a few of those, and this is the second stop of the PWA tour today. I think Shane did a great job kicking us off. We've got Rowan in the afternoon. But yeah, let's take a few minutes here to answer any questions before we wrap up. So.
I have some. Oh, yes, some.
That's right.
This probably isn't a question for James because you're Mr. Magento, but probably for Deity. I know you mentioned earlier about the partners that you support.
Yeah.
Do you see any more kind of fragmentation and the end of third-party extensions that need to present on the front end?
Yeah, of course. I mean, using a third-party extension is something it's a different way of using it. You don't just, normally you install it and it's like back-end and front-end work. Obviously, this has to be different, has to be split in some way. We're working together with great partners on this. For example, at HatWorks, we're working together with Shipper HQ. We're working together with Orgolia, real guys who know how to build this kind of extensions and third-party integrations. So we're not trying to figure this out all by ourselves because there are some great minds out there, and this is why we decide to partner up with them. So yeah, it's a little bit different than what we're used to, but as soon as it's up and running, it's so beautiful. So it's very good.
And same question to James. Have you seen a lot of traction from third-party module developers really buying into the PWA studio rather than trying to integrate with these other three?
I mean, people are all hedging. There's so much that's unknown. So we have gotten probably more interest in PWA by a factor of 10 from the partner community and from the solution integrator community than we expected. And that has its highs and its lows. But it did at least confirm for us that our commitment to doing an extensibility project more so than just another PWA implementation. We certainly, but we're not going to just plainly compete, that our commitment there was the right one. I think in a distributed ecosystem, like, history has shown that standards, just like de facto standards, can emerge. Like MP3s, or the idea of an extensibility point that everyone uses that then could allow components to be reused across the different implementations. We've got React going here, we've got React going there. Even Vue over there can be abstracted into a web component type of thing. So what if there were, common interfaces or common sets of decorators that could allow these things to interoperate? That's the kind of thing that partners are interested in, because they want to know, look, we know we have to throw out some front end, but how are we going to continue with our business model, which allows you to act at a distance upon an instance of Magento? We have to make sure that our architecture for that makes sense, that that layout XML's power is not something people miss terribly. We need power, and we need robustness as well. And so these folks have done a great service in beginning that conversation in multiple places at once. We consider it, I think, our responsibility to start rolling out drafts of standards for this, just because, not that we have the highest quality or expertise of developers, but just because that's our natural place in the ecosystem as the maintainers of core. So yeah, there's a lot of interest, and that's kind of the main focus of the studio project.
Thanks.
Great. Yessi, I think you had a question as well?
Well, or just an add-on.
Okay.
Just a comment.
Just a comment.
Yeah, so I'm the organizer of Reacticon, and thank you for mentioning it as well. And the second version of Reacticon is going to be on the October the 4th. However, I'm also actually part of this XDN organization, which is a voluntary initiative of third-party extension developers. And what we're trying to do is raise the level of extensions on all kinds of levels. So that's actually hooking into your question earlier. What we're trying to do is raise the level on PHP and the front-end technology that we currently have. But we're also wondering, like, what kind of solutions are going to be there on a PWA level. So basically, the question that I raised half a year ago almost at Reacticon 1 is still there. That actually, as extension developers, we're hoping to see that there's going to be some kind of formatting of React components, so that literally a React component is something that you can pick up from Commerce and then drop into Deity or PWA Studio, so it's going to be reusable. even theoretically with Vue storefront, but that's going to be more difficult because the components are just a different structure. So it's more like a call out that extension developers are also eager to hear like what is coming up next.
Yep, absolutely agree. So, I mean, we could probably go all morning on things. John, I just want to be mindful of some of the time here. Do you think we have time for one more question? Okay, one more question. So,
hi, this is a question for James. So, since Adobe has acquired Magento, what do you think the impact is going to be with PWA and what you're doing with PWA when AEM may be coming in front or being pushed in front of Magento?
Pushed in front of? Where are you getting this information?
Just a guess.
So Adobe has this AEM, this Adobe Experience Manager, that is a sort of combination CMS platform, and they also have an ambitious project, the SPA, Single Page Application Editor, which immediately struck me actually as like, that's kind of an old term. Boy, that's like a 10-year-old term. But they nevertheless have a really cool implementation of WYSIWYG that is supposed to actually adapt to different front-end frameworks. And for that, the plumbing is still a bit unclear. They haven't done full information sharing with us yet. But it is right in line with us. And they just sort of call us up and they say, yeah, PWA seems to work here. That seems to work. And again, at this point, there's more stuff that we want to know from them probably than you want to know from us. But what they have disclosed is that they want us to explore integration with AEM and with the single page editor, but not as a client, not as a plugin, not as a thing to be subsumed, but as a thing to contribute or even re-architect and refactor. I mean, the thing that they're trying to do is hard. I've tried to do it. I have a patent on it I won't even look at. I think they infringe on it, but now what are you going to do? So like, it's going to be hard, and I suspect that they need help, so the PWA Studio effort will integrate with that well. What we want to make sure of is that at no point do we seem to, or actually to rededicate resources away from the community effort and supporting the extension, the extensibility and the ecosystem that we are trying to engender, so yeah.
great. Thank you. So I think we're at time. We could be here again all day afternoon. Clearly there'll be more questions, but I can't thank you enough, all the panelists, for joining us, coming out to meet Magento UK. And thank you for your time. We'll be around all day this evening, and definitely stay in touch. So thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the
Thank
conference.
you.